that the player playing black moved the pawn up the chessboard, but could not find his queen. And now for a rule that I did not know in my first chess tournament. I was playing a game, my opponent's pawn reached the other side, and he asked for his queen back. Okay, I was 5 years old, but I did not know that that was a rule. In fact, because pawns cannot go backward when a pawn reaches the other side, it has to do something, otherwise it turns into a rock, and that's not terribly exciting. So, when a pawn goes to the other side, we get a promotion, and 98% of the time, you are going to want a queen. But I have to explain the process today because it's a little bit different online versus over the board. Let's go over online first. When a pawn gets to the other side, luckily, on ChessKid, you get your choice of pieces. You will always get to choose your piece. And again, 98% of the time, you are going to want a queen. By the way, if you already have a queen, you can and should get a second queen. You're allowed to keep piling up more queens. So, you're not exactly getting a piece back, you're literally turning it into a new piece. There's a small difference there because again, you can and should get a queen every time. Even if you already have one, start stacking up those queens and then go for checkmate, of course. However, there's going to be a very small percentage of the time where you do not want a queen. So let's hit a backup button and let's pretend that this queen was on a different square. Can you imagine her being on that square? Bet you can. Now, if our pawn gets to the other side and turns into a queen, it'll be queen and 3 pawns versus queen and 3 pawns. That's probably going to be a draw. So, you might have already recognized we want something different. We want a knight. And when our pawn moves to the other side, it can turn into a knight if you want to. Again, we're pretending the black queen is on c6, and all you have to do is click the knight. And again, if the queen was on this square, we would fork the king and the queen. We would win the queen, it'd be a winning endgame. However, if you're playing on the big boy website on chess.com, there's something called auto queen, and you need to be really careful because if you have auto queen on in your settings, it's going to promote to queen every time, even in positions where you might want something else. There's a way around that. I would just advise you to stick to ChessKid, where you will always get to choose your piece. But now, I have to explain about something that could happen if you play over the board chess. This is a position from a few years ago at the Canadian Championship. It was the playoff game, and the black pawns are moving up the board. In fact, the players were so low on time that the player playing black moved the pawn up the chessboard, but could not find his queen. The captured queen, where was it? It was nowhere to be found. So he grabbed a rook and turned a rook upside down. What? Sometimes we do this when we play fun games in the park, but in official international rules, you're not allowed to do that. And they required him to call that piece a rook, even though he said the word queen, and he clearly wanted a queen. There's absolutely no reason to get a rook in this position. And when the pawn moved up, well, unfortunately for him, it had to turn into a rook. So that's a little bit of a tricky issue, but if you're playing over the board and you cannot find a queen or a second queen, you're actually allowed to stop the clock and go find one, but do not turn a rook upside down or use any other fancy method to pretend it is a queen, because in international rules you're not allowed to. And white went on to win after promoting a queen, and if only this were a queen it could block, black would actually be okay, but it being a rook, that was a problem. Black went on to lose. So be really careful. When you play on ChessKid, we pretty much handle this for you. When a pawn gets to the other side, you're going to get your choice of 4 different pieces. But when you play over the board, stop the clock, take the time you need, go find a queen, go walk around the room, go to a friend's chess set, find the correct queen. Even if it's a second queen that you need, you can still do that and be within the rules. So a little bit tricky, but that is exactly what happens when a pawn gets to the other side of the board.